highly processed fractionated foods that contain 4,000 calories per pound. They don't exist in nature in that form. Oils in nature come as a part of a whole natural food component. When you rip a cell apart and take one component out, in this case the oil, you begin a process of things ranging from peroxidation on down. So this idea of taking fractionated foods like oil and considering them healthy because they may have less detrimental factors than other forms of oil. For example, olive oil may have less negative aspects compared to, say, safflower oil or corn oil or something else. That because it's less bad doesn't make it healthy. There's absolutely no reason to be including oil in a fractionated form in the diet, or any other fractionated food for that matter. And there are a number of reasons why that presents disadvantage, not the least of which is the artificially concentrated caloric density, which leads to overeating and difficulties in that regard. So taking foods and pouring olive oil over and pretending it's a health food is kind of, from my viewpoint, kind of nonsense. And it's particularly bad if you take those oils and then you heat them at high temperature in the form of fried foods, obviously, and other things. That compounds the negative components associated with fractionated foods. A salt is an essential nutrient. It's critically necessary to our survival. Without enough sodium in the diet, we would die. In fact, it's so precious and it's so rare in nature that our bodies are designed to detect it at very small quantities and to hold on to it and to preserve and conserve it in our bodies. And that worked well for 1 billion years, where we learned to eat certain foods because we were attracted to them because they had a natural sodium concentration. The problem came as we learned to process salt and concentrate it. We began to add it to processed foods particularly, and because the natural inclination was to enjoy and preserve and relish salt, we got into trouble. And of course that leads to difficulties today. Processed food, people realize that they can take just about any food, put enough salt on it, and people will eat it. In order to make good foods taste good without adding salt and oil, you have to start with foods that taste good. Mm-hmm. And you have to minimize the processing so that you retain the natural flavors. Now, because we do need salt, the question is, of course, where do you get it from if you don't add it to your foods? And it turns out that whole natural foods contain sodium in varying degrees. And if you add up how much sodium is in a diet of whole natural foods, of fruits and vegetables like we're advocating, there's about 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams of sodium, which is what the body actually needs and what most people thrive on. As soon as you begin adding processed salt to the diet, complications ensue, and depending on the individual, health compromising begins. About at least a third of the population particularly have difficulty eliminating excess of salt from the kidneys, and these are the people that become vulnerable to high blood pressure when they eat processed food diets. And also the people that respond very well to low sodium intakes. So just by getting rid of all this added processed sodium from the diet, many people are able to dramatically improve their health. One of the things that excess salt does, besides raise blood pressure, is it allows people to hold on to excess fluid, so they get a lot of bloating and swelling, the edema, the non-healing problems that happen sometimes with wounds, the congestion, and ultimately things like congestive heart failure and other problems. Not to mention the fact that salt is a powerful stimulant. If, for example, you sit and eat your fill of rice or your fill of potatoes or other whole natural foods, you eat a certain amount and then you feel full. If you spice and salt that food up real heavily, sometimes people will find they'll eat more food before they feel satiated. As a consequence, it may complicate the brain and satiety's mechanisms of achieving normal food balance. And so I believe that it also contributes, at least for some people, to overeating and all the things that come from that, from obesity to the disease of dietary excess. The fact that salt is contaminated with other minerals, which is the main argument for many of these, that they have other minerals besides sodium chloride in it. Again, just because it's less concentrated per volume in sodium doesn't make it healthful. And the idea that you have to add a lot of this processed food to the diet in order to meet some purported need, I think, is a mistake. There are rare exceptions. People that have conditions like hyperparathyroidism or other things may need to have a higher concentration of sodium in their diet than the average person. But for the vast majority of us, we're better off not using added salt to the diet, but relying on the sodium that comes from the food itself. And charging 10 times as much per pound and getting things that have other minerals mixed in and pretending that that makes it health food, again, from my viewpoint, is nonsense.